The rain pounded the windshield with a deafening force. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Perfectly timed, perfectly planned. Before we continue the story, comment what city you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications if you enjoy stories like this. Damon Ellison, the heir to one of the wealthiest families in the country, sat in his sports car, watching the wipers struggle to clear the sheets of rain that blurred his view. He had places to be, deals to make, power to wield. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. But here he was, stuck, in the middle of nowhere, in the downpour of a small town, outside Ashtonville, Georgia. The engine of his $200,000 car had sputtered, stalled, and failed him when he needed it most. His fingers gripped the wheel tighter, but the car wouldn't budge. He slammed his fist on the dashboard, cursing under his breath. Then, through the curtain of rain, a flicker of movement. A beat-up truck with peeling paint slowly rolled to a stop beside him. A woman stepped out, her face framed by the dim glow of the headlights. She wasn't who he expected to see, not that he expected anyone at all. His eyes narrowed, irritation creeping into his voice. "What do you want?" he called out, his tone dismissive. He couldn't be bothered to be polite, not when he was late for a meeting that could change everything. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't seem intimidated by his tone, nor the storm. She simply glanced at his car, then looked back at him with calm eyes, as if seeing right through his frustration. "I can help you with that," she said, pointing at the hood of his car. He scoffed. You? You look like you can barely keep that truck running yourself." The woman didn't respond to the insult. She just moved past him, as if his words meant nothing. The sound of the rain drowned out everything else for a moment as she popped open the hood. Damon sat back, watching her with a smirk. This was going to be interesting. The woman's hands moved with surprising precision. She tightened a loose bolt here, adjusted a wire there, and within minutes, the engine hummed back to life. She slammed the hood shut and turned to him. "Should be good to go now," she said simply, wiping her hands on the side of her jeans. Damon stared at her, dumbfounded. "How did you?" he started, his voice trailing off. She didn't answer. Instead, she simply walked around to the driver's side of her truck. But as she did, Damon's eyes flicked down to her left hand. A glint of gold. A ring. Not just any ring. A ring that, in that moment, stopped his breath. A ring that he knew all too well. A ring that shouldn't be anywhere but locked away in the vaults of his family's estate. His heart skipped. He stood frozen, staring at it. That ring. It was impossible. It shouldn't be here, on this woman, on this roadside, in this forgotten corner of nowhere. For a split second, the world around him ceased to exist. The rain, the storm, even the car seemed to fade away. His focus was on nothing but the ring, shining, gleaming in the dim light, mocking him, daring him to look deeper. And then, his words came out as a whisper. "That ring should have never existed outside my family's vault." The woman's eyes locked with his, a strange knowing behind them. A silent tension hung between them. He wasn't just stranded anymore. He was facing something far bigger than he ever could have imagined. Damon Ellison was a man accustomed to control. Born into wealth, his name carried power, prestige, and influence. As the only son of Charles Ellison, the notorious oil tycoon who had built his empire from nothing, Damon had never known a day of hardship. Everything in his life was carefully orchestrated. His multi-million-dollar mansion, the private jets, the luxury cars, the endless stream of business deals. It was all part of a world that he had inherited and shaped to his desires. Yet, despite the wealth and power, Damon was a man at war with his own family. He hadn't spoken to his father in over 2 years, the rift caused by a betrayal that had shaken the very foundation of everything Damon thought he knew. His father's decision to cut him out of the family's oil empire in favor of an outsider, a decision that had shattered Damon's place in the family, had left a scar that he still wore, though he hid it behind a mask of cold indifference. He came to Ashtonville not just to escape the complications of city life, but to track down the truth behind that betrayal. It was a small town, quiet, almost forgotten. But Damon's mission here wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about uncovering a secret that had been buried for decades. A secret involving a business partner, a forged contract, and a series of lies that led to his exclusion from the family fortune. He wasn't just searching for money. He was searching for justice. And justice, Damon believed, was something only he could deliver. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Not this woman, not this moment, not the sight of that ring. Lena Harper had no idea who Damon Ellison was. And she didn't care. In fact, she'd spent most of her life doing her best to avoid the kind of people who paraded wealth like an entitlement. Her life was simple, not easy, but simple. By day, Lena worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. She worked as a waitress at a local diner, taking orders from people who barely looked up from their phones. In the afternoons, she'd rush over to the Harper family farm, a piece of land passed down through generations, and help her grandmother, who was in the later stages of her life, tend to the vegetable garden. When the work was done, she'd go to church. Every Sunday, without fail, she taught Sunday school, guiding children through lessons of faith and kindness, instilling in them the strength that had sustained her own family for generations. Lena wasn't interested in the allure of money. She didn't want the fancy clothes or the trips to exotic locations. She wanted peace. She wanted to make a difference. She had never been interested in status, and she certainly didn't want to be noticed by the kind of man Damon Ellison appeared to be. But there was something in Lena that went beyond her simplicity. Beneath her modest exterior, there was a quiet strength, a quiet faith in Jesus Christ, the kind that held her steady when life became too much to bear. A faith that had carried her through loss, through hardship, and through the heartbreak of watching her family struggle to keep the farm alive. And that ring was the only hint that Lena might not be as ordinary as she seemed. No one in town knew that she had inherited it. It was a family heirloom, passed down from her mother's side, a lineage of women who had once been part of a world much bigger than the small-town life Lena now embraced. The ring had been hidden away, its existence known only to a few. It had once belonged to a woman of great power, but that woman had vanished long before Lena was born, leaving the ring as a silent reminder of a past best forgotten. Lena had never worn it publicly, not until that moment when she had helped Damon Ellison. It was meant to stay hidden, a secret of her past she could never escape, no matter how hard she tried. But fate had a way of revealing secrets, whether we were ready or not. And the look on Damon's face when he saw that ring told Lena that this moment was no accident. As the storm continued to rage outside, Damon and Lena stood frozen in the silence between them. He was lost in thought, trying to piece together the puzzle of the ring. She, on the other hand, had no idea the magnitude of what she had just set in motion. It wasn't just a coincidence that their paths had crossed in this isolated town. This wasn't just a chance meeting on a rainy night. Something greater was at play. Lena, for the first time in a long time, felt a stirring in her heart. A stirring of faith, a faith that told her this was no random encounter. This was divine intervention. It had to be. And though Lena never sought the attention of someone like Damon Ellison, something about him felt different. Something about his eyes, behind the cold exterior, she saw a man struggling, a man burdened by his own darkness. She didn't know his story, but she could feel the weight of it. She had no idea that the simple act of helping him fix his car would lead her down a path that would force her to confront her own past, a past she thought was long buried. The truth, hidden for so long, would soon rise to the surface. And with it, a challenge Lena never anticipated. Damon, on the other hand, had no idea just how much his mission was about to unravel. The simple woman standing in front of them, with that mysterious ring on her finger, held the key to everything he had been searching for. But it wasn't just money. It wasn't just vengeance. This story was about something much deeper. It was about redemption. Lena's life was as simple as it was hard. Each day was a balance between work, family, and faith, with no time for luxuries or indulgences. The world she lived in wasn't one of sparkling parties or champagne glasses. It was a world where hard work and perseverance were the only currency that mattered. Her mornings began early, long before the sun had risen above the Georgia hills. By 5 a.m., Lena was already dressed and on her way to the diner in town, a modest, family-owned establishment known for its greasy breakfast and strong coffee. The diner wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. She wore a faded apron, a simple cotton blouse, and a pair of worn sneakers that had seen better days. The kind of clothes you'd wear when you were used to getting your hands dirty. Lena's shift started with the usual rush. The early birds who came in for their coffee, the farmers who sat by the window with their plates stacked high. Her hands were quick, moving with the rhythm of years of practice. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh-brewed coffee filled the air, and she smiled, a warm, patient smile, for each customer, no matter how grumpy or demanding they were. But the diner was only one part of Lena's life. When her shift ended, she rushed home to take care of her grandmother, who had been bedridden for the past few years. The old woman had been the heart and soul of the family, and now it was Lena's turn to return the care she had received all her life. Her grandmother was a quiet woman, wise beyond her years, and every evening after dinner, they would sit in the rocking chairs on the porch and talk about the past, about faith, about the power of prayer. And then, once her grandmother had gone to bed, Lena would walk out into the garden, her hands brushing the plants her grandmother had grown, and sit quietly under the stars. She would pray, not for herself, but for her family, for the strength to keep going, for the wisdom to face each challenge, for the provision that only God could provide. In the quiet solitude of those moments, Lena would slip the ring onto her finger. It wasn't an everyday thing. She didn't wear it to work or to church, but when she prayed, when she spoke to God, the ring was there. It had been a promise, a gift from her mother before she passed away, a symbol of the strength of their lineage and the faith that ran through their blood. The ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of an old promise. A promise that she would continue to live with faith, no matter what life threw her way. Lena didn't know it yet, but that promise was about to become the foundation upon which her life would be tested. In stark contrast, Damon Ellison's life was the stuff of glossy magazine spreads. It was the kind of life people envied from afar, the kind of life that glittered with wealth and luxury. But the truth, as always, was far less glamorous. His mornings didn't start with the soft hum of a coffee machine or the sweet scent of homemade bread. No, Damon woke up in a high-end suite at the Marble U Hotel in Midwood Heights, Texas. The room was pristine. White marble floors, gold trim on the windows, floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a panoramic view of the city skyline. A far cry from the rainy roads of Ashtonville. His first action of the day was always the same: a glance at the stocks, a check of the markets, an email or two from his assistants. It was a cycle he had grown accustomed to, one he had built for himself. He ate breakfast alone, always alone. There were no family gatherings, no warm kitchens filled with laughter. Just the soft clinking of silverware on fine china as he ate his eggs and sipped coffee, reading the newspaper without truly seeing it. His life was a series of boardroom meetings, deals signed in the back of sleek town cars, and lonely dinners at five-star restaurants where he ate his meals in silence, surrounded by strangers who would never truly know him. He often found himself staring out at the city, wondering how he had arrived at this place. The man who once dreamed of connecting with his father, of being part of something greater than just himself, was now alone, locked in a battle for control of an empire that had once been his birthright. The oil business was ruthless, and Damon had learned that the hard way. And yet, despite the wealth and success, Damon was always searching. Searching for something he couldn't name, something he couldn't find in the polished boardrooms or the glass-walled skyscrapers. He thought about the betrayal, about the decision his father had made all those years ago to shut him out. The sting of it never went away. But it wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about revenge. Damon was searching for meaning. He was searching for something to fill the emptiness inside, something to heal the wounds he carried. At night, when the city's lights flickered in the distance and the soft hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, Damon would close his eyes and think about the life he'd once hoped for. He'd think about the family he'd lost, the relationships he'd never built. He'd think about the love he had been too proud to seek, the forgiveness he had never asked for. But most of all, Damon thought about the ring. He had heard the stories. Stories about the Harper family ring, a piece of jewelry that had once belonged to a powerful matriarch, Lena's ancestor. It was rumored to hold more than just sentimental value. It was said to carry a deep connection to the Ellison legacy, a connection Damon was desperate to understand. For all his wealth, all his power, he had never been able to shake the feeling that something important was slipping through his fingers. That night in the storm, when he'd seen the ring on Lena's finger, something inside him had shifted. He couldn't explain it, but he felt the weight of that moment, as if everything in his life had led him to this one encounter. It was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. But Lena didn't know any of this. She had no idea who Damon Ellison was or why her life had just intersected with his. She was still in the middle of her ordinary life, unaware that her simple act of kindness had set into motion a series of events that would change both their lives forever. As Lena knelt by her grandmother's bedside, holding her hand and whispering a prayer of gratitude, she didn't know that her faith would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. She had no idea that the ring she wore, so simple, so hidden, was about to become the key to unlocking secrets she never knew existed. And Damon? Damon had no idea that the woman he had dismissed as ordinary was about to reveal a truth so powerful it would change everything he thought he knew about family, about loyalty, and about the redemption he so desperately sought. The sun hung low in the sky the following day, casting a golden hue over Ashtonville. The town was still wet from the rainstorm the night before, and the air smelled fresh, like earth and rain. But in the quiet corners of Lena's world, a storm was brewing. It started with a knock on the diner door. The familiar sound of the bell chimed as it swung open, and Lena looked up from the greasy counter, a smile already forming on her face for the next customer. She didn't expect to see him. Not today. Not ever again. Damon Ellison. He stood there, his figure framed by the doorway, his tailored suit completely out of place in the humble diner. He looked as if he had stepped out of a different world, one where people didn't scrape by, one where the rules were different, and power was wielded like a weapon. Lena's hands paused mid-motion, the rag in her hand freezing in the air as she stared at him. He looked every bit the part of the man she had seen the night before, but today there was something different, something desperate in his eyes. He walked in without hesitation, the soft tap of his polished shoes on the diner's tile floor betraying the weight of his purpose. The other customers hardly took notice, lost in their own worlds, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Damon took a seat at the counter, his eyes locked on her as if he had no intention of looking away. "Lena Harper," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge of urgency. "I need to speak with you." Lena set the rag down and wiped her hands on her apron, her brow furrowed. "What is it, Mr. Ellison?" she asked, her voice steady, though the faintest tremor ran through her. She hadn't been expecting this. Not here. Not now. He didn't waste time. His eyes glanced at the customers, then returned to her, almost too focused. "I'm willing to pay you for the ring." The offer hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. The ring. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. It wasn't just any ring, it was the ring, the promise made long ago. The promise that had shaped her life, that had given her the strength to keep going through all the struggles. She swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking into her. She didn't care about money. She never had. "No," she said simply, looking him in the eye. "It's not for sale." Damon's eyes darkened. "I'm offering you a generous sum. You don't understand what you have there. It's priceless." Lena's gaze didn't waver. She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quieter but filled with resolve. "This ring doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the promise behind it." For a moment, Damon said nothing. His jaw clenched, and he leaned in slightly, his voice lowering with intensity. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Lena. That ring, it's been part of my family for decades. It was stolen by someone I loved, and I need it back. Now." The diner seemed to fade into the background, the hum of conversation growing faint as Lena locked eyes with him. She had heard about the family heirloom, the ring passed down through the Ellison family, a symbol of power, of legacy. But to her, it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a bond, a promise, a legacy of faith and family that had nothing to do with money or wealth. "I know what it is," she said softly, but firmly. "And I know who it belongs to." Damon's frustration flared, but before he could press further, something shifted in Lena. A flicker of something deep inside her sparked a memory, a connection. She could feel it, the weight of the promise her mother had made to the Ellisons so many years ago. It was like a veil being lifted from the past, and in that moment, she decided to speak the truth that had been buried for so long. Lena's voice dropped to a near whisper, but there was power in it, an unshakable truth that rang through the air. "It belongs to my mother." Damon froze. His entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The hard edge in his eyes softened, replaced by confusion and something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. Lena's words hung in the air, each one heavy with years of pain, grief, and unspoken history. She could feel the weight of the truth, the way it shifted the balance of everything Damon had ever known. My mother, Lena continued, her voice steady. She was best friends with your mother. And then, one day, she vanished. But before she did, she took the ring. The heirloom ring. A long silence followed. Damon opened his mouth, but no words came out. His mind raced, the memories of a childhood he had buried under layers of anger and resentment suddenly flooding back. He remembered his mother speaking about her best friend, about Lena's mother, but always in whispers, always with a sadness he never understood. But he knew one thing for sure, Lena's mother hadn't just disappeared. She had taken something with her. Something Damon had spent years searching for. The ring. A flashback hit him like a tidal wave, his mother, so young, so beautiful, telling him stories of a bond with Lena's mother, a friendship that had been more than just companionship. They had been family. But when his mother's best friend disappeared, the ring had vanished with her. Damon's heart pounded in his chest as the pieces began to fall into place. The truth was more complicated than he could have ever imagined. And the woman in front of him, this simple diner waitress with a faith that radiated from her very soul, held the answers to questions he had been asking for his entire life. His voice was barely a whisper. Your mother, she took the ring, didn't she? Lena nodded slowly, her eyes softening as she looked at him. She did. But she didn't take it to hurt you or your family, Damon. She took it because it was a promise. A promise she made to your mother, and a promise she made to herself. A deep silence settled over them both. The past, which had seemed so distant, had suddenly become very real. The truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. But this was only the beginning. Lena had no idea just how much her mother's promise would change everything. And Damon, for the first time in years, felt something stir inside him, a flicker of hope, and a longing for something he didn't yet understand. The days following their encounter felt like a slow burn, each moment dragging Lena further into an uncomfortable truth she wasn't ready to confront. At first, it was subtle. Damon's eyes, always calculating, never truly leaving her. He had demanded answers, but she had given him only fragments of a past she didn't understand, a past her mother had kept hidden. In his eyes, she could see the doubt forming, the skepticism growing. And it didn't take long before it spilled over into action. Lena had expected some tension, sure, but nothing like this. It wasn't enough that Damon's presence had unsettled her. Now, her entire world was beginning to unravel. It started with rumors. They were quiet at first, whispers behind her back from the regulars at the diner. At first, she tried to ignore them, chalking it up to town gossip. But when the whispers began to turn into open comments, she couldn't ignore it any longer. Lena Harper, the waitress who claimed she had a ring that belonged to the Ellison family. The ring that had disappeared over 2 decades ago. It wasn't long before she realized that Damon's presence in the diner wasn't as benign as she had hoped. Damon had hired private security, people who had come to town under the guise of gathering information, but who were, in reality, watching her every move. Damon's wealth had a way of getting what it wanted, and soon, Lena's life was no longer her own. The rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by the fire of his investigation. People began questioning her, calling her a fraud, a gold digger, even a thief, all for a ring that she never asked for, never sought, and that she had no answers for. It all came crashing down when Lena walked into the diner one evening, ready to start another shift, only to find the manager waiting for her in the back. Lena, we have to let you go, he said, his voice tight, uncomfortable. I can't have this kind of drama here. The customers are talking, and it's hurting business. I'm sorry. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had worked at that diner for years. It was her lifeline. But now, it was gone. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stood there, frozen. All the weight of the past few days, of the rumors and the investigation, seemed to hit her all at once. Her hands trembled, and her throat tightened. How had it all gone so wrong? She hadn't wanted any of this. All she had wanted was to honor the promise her mother had made. To keep the legacy alive, to honor her faith. As she left the diner for the last time, her thoughts began to churn. She had lost her job, But the worst part was the sinking feeling that Damon was behind it. His relentless pursuit of the truth, whatever that truth was, had destroyed everything in its wake. Her hands gripped the steering wheel of her old truck as she drove home, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but her mind far from it. She didn't know what to do anymore. Everything she had worked for seemed to be falling apart, and the one thing that had always kept her grounded, her faith, was now feeling like a distant memory. That night, after the sun had set and the world had quieted, Lena found herself in the small, dimly lit room she called home. The soft ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound that filled the silence, but it did little to calm her racing thoughts. She stood by the window, staring out at the night sky, and as her gaze drifted across the darkened horizon, a deep sense of loss washed over her. Lena's fingers brushed against the cold metal of the ring on her finger, the same ring that had once been a symbol of her mother's love and the promise she had made. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, but the tears came anyway. "Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "if you gave me this ring for a reason, show me what it is." She stood there for what felt like hours, but the answer didn't come. Not immediately. And in that moment, she wasn't sure what to believe. Had her mother's promise been real? Had the ring truly meant something significant? Or was it just a symbol of a past that no longer had any place in the world she knew? Her thoughts spun in circles, but in the silence that followed, something strange began to happen. The anger and frustration that had been building up inside her slowly started to subside. The tears that had filled her eyes began to dry, and in their place was a quiet, deep peace, a peace she couldn't explain. Lena didn't know how long she stood there, but eventually she sank to her knees, the weight of everything pressing down on her. And then, in the stillness, she whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken in years. "Lord, I don't understand why all of this is happening. I don't understand why Damon is so determined to take this ring. But I trust you. I trust you to guide me through this, to show me what this all means. And I trust that you have a plan. Please, show me what it is." For a long moment, there was only the sound of her breath, steady and calm, as the words of her prayer seemed to echo in the quiet room. Then, just as Lena began to close her eyes in prayer, a soft light flickered in her heart. She didn't hear a voice, but somehow she felt as though the answer was beginning to take shape in her mind. The promise wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It wasn't just about Damon or the family history tied to the ring. It was about something bigger, something divine. And though the road ahead seemed unclear, Lena had a newfound determination. She would hold on to that promise, and in doing so, she would hold on to her faith. Little did she know, the journey ahead would be one of revelation, not just of the ring, but of her true calling and of Damon's place in that story. The investigation had taken on a life of its own, with Damon tirelessly digging through every shred of history he could find, old records, family archives, private documents that had been buried for decades. What he uncovered shocked him to the core. Lena's mother wasn't just a woman who vanished into thin air. She wasn't some thief who had stolen the Ellison family's precious heirloom ring, as Damon had first suspected. No. What he found buried beneath years of deception and distortion was something far more devastating. Lena's mother, Marion Harper, had been adopted by Damon's mother, Catherine Ellison, under a false identity. The records that had long been erased, the family history rewritten, painted a different picture, one that Damon's father, Nathaniel Ellison, had carefully concealed. It wasn't theft. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a gift. The ring had been given to Marion by Catherine, a gesture of deep love, one that had held significance far beyond what Damon had ever imagined. The promise was real. The history tied to that ring was his family's truth, not a lie. But Nathaniel had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase that truth, hiding it for years in an attempt to protect the family's wealth and image. The scandal, the truth of Marion's adoption, could have ruined everything. Nathaniel Ellison had feared that a connection to an outsider, someone of humble beginnings, no less, would tarnish the prestigious legacy of the Ellison family. So he had silenced it all, erased it from family records, torn apart letters, and destroyed anything that might lead back to the original truth. And that ring, the one that had brought Damon and Lena together, was the key to it all. As the truth unraveled, Damon's guilt grew with every passing moment. How had he never seen it before? How had he allowed himself to believe the worst of Lena, when all along, the answers had been right in front of him. The weight of his family's legacy and the choices his father had made pressed down on him, and for the first time, Damon wondered if there was any redemption for the damage that had been done. Could it be undone? Could the past be repaired? In a moment of clarity, Damon decided that the only way forward was to make amends. He couldn't undo the years of lies, the harm caused by his family's actions, but he could start by confronting Lena and offering her an apology. He knew he owed her the truth, and he hoped, deep down, that it wasn't too late to do something right. Damon sent an invitation to Lena, an offer to attend a gala, an exclusive event thrown by Ellison Enterprises. His message was simple: come. Let me explain. Lena was reluctant at first. She had no interest in Damon's world, no desire to return to the chaos he had brought into her life. But something about his sincerity tugged at her heart. There was an apology in his words, an honesty that she hadn't seen before. She agreed, though with no expectation of reconciliation. On the night of the gala, Lena stood before her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. She had a decision to make. She didn't have a designer gown. She couldn't afford one, not on her waitress salary. Instead, she wore a simple thrift store dress, one that she had found during one of her many trips to the secondhand shop. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't flashy, but it was clean, neat, and, in some strange way, it felt like the perfect choice. Her grandmother had always said that true beauty came from within, from the kindness in one's heart, not from the things you wore or the wealth you accumulated. And Lena carried that belief with her as she stepped out of her small apartment and into the night. As she arrived at the venue, the grand ballroom of Ellison Enterprises, she couldn't help but feel like an outsider. The building was enormous, gleaming with gold and marble, a testament to everything that Damon's family had built. The people gathered inside were dressed in extravagant gowns and tuxedos, their laughter echoing against the walls. Lena felt small in comparison, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity. She entered, and immediately, heads turned. Whispers began to circulate as the guests looked her up and down, taking note of her thrift store dress, her modest appearance. But what they couldn't deny was the strength that radiated from her. A strength that came not from her clothes or her wealth, but from her soul. And then, across the room, Damon Ellison saw her. He had been waiting, watching the crowd, but the moment his eyes landed on her, time seemed to freeze. Lena was standing by the edge of the ballroom, her presence somehow outshining the luxury that surrounded her. Her simple, yet elegant dress made her seem untouched by the world of wealth and privilege, yet she still carried herself like a queen. But what took Damon's breath away wasn't just her appearance. It was the unmistakable look of strength in her eyes, a strength that spoke of grace, faith, and an unshakable resolve. He had been so wrong, so incredibly wrong. But before he could take a step toward her, something else caught his attention. At the far end of the ballroom, standing near a group of powerful figures, was his father, Nathaniel Ellison, the man who had built their empire, the man who had erased Lena's mother from their family's history. Nathaniel's eyes locked with Lena's, and in that moment, his face went ashen. He froze, his jaw clenched, his lips parted as though he was about to speak, but no words came. His gaze never left Lena, and Damon could see the fear, the recognition, the guilt, and something darker settle in his father's eyes. Lena's presence had shaken him, just as it had shaken Damon, but for reasons far deeper than either of them could fully understand at that moment. The truth, the weight of the past, was finally catching up to Nathaniel Ellison, and Damon, in that instant, realized that this was no longer just about the ring. This was about a legacy that had been built on secrets, on lies, and on a woman who had been erased from their history. And Lena, standing before them, was the one who held the key to everything. As Damon slowly walked toward her, their eyes met. A silent understanding passed between them. The journey was far from over. But tonight, at least, they were on the same side. The room had grown heavy with tension. Damon had barely taken a step closer to Lena when his father, Nathaniel, appeared at his side like a shadow, his presence as commanding and suffocating as ever. "Get her out of here before the board starts asking questions," Nathaniel hissed in Damon's ear, his voice low and urgent, though the command was unmistakable. The old man's eyes flickered toward Lena, then to the group of influential business leaders clustered near the back of the ballroom. He knew how to protect his empire, how to silence anything that threatened it. Damon's stomach churned. There was a time when he would have obeyed without question. A time when the fear of his father's wrath and the weight of the family's legacy would have been enough to push him into submission. But not now. Not with Lena standing there, her presence, so pure, so untainted by the corruption that his father had woven into their lives. But as the seconds stretched, Damon felt the pull of his father's pressure. His mind warred with his heart. The invitation to Lena had been a promise to make amends, to seek redemption for the lies and sins of his family. Yet here was his father, demanding he act swiftly, with no room for sentiment, no room for truth. Damon stood frozen, his pulse racing as he faced a choice he never imagined he would have to make. Lena didn't wait for him to decide. She saw the shift in Damon's eyes, saw the hesitation, the battle between what he knew was right and the legacy of lies his father had imposed on him. And in that moment, she knew. She knew that nothing had changed, not truly. He was still trapped in the very system that had caused her family's pain. Humiliation surged through her. All the old wounds, the silent betrayals from a world she had never wanted to be part of, opened up once again. The man she had trusted to help reveal the truth had just been swept back into the lies. Without another word, Lena turned and walked swiftly toward the exit, her steps quickening as she moved through the crowd. The echo of her heels against the marble floor sounded like the ticking of a clock, the seconds slipping away, carrying her farther from everything she had hoped for. Damon stood still, torn. His heart wanted to run after her, to hold her, to explain himself. But his legs felt heavy, weighed down by his father's cold, unspoken threat. Damon, Nathaniel called sharply. Do your duty. You know what's at stake. But Damon's eyes stayed fixed on Lena's retreating figure. In that moment, his mind was clear for the first time in years. Without another thought, Damon pushed through the crowd, racing to catch up. But it was too late. Lena was already gone, disappearing into the cool night air, the sound of the gala fading behind them. Lena's mind was a storm as she ran. She had been here before. Feeling small, feeling insignificant in the face of a world that had always looked down on her. She had been rejected, discarded, and now she was being ignored again. The promise she had clung to for so long, the belief that people could change, that people could be good, felt like it had been shattered in the blink of an eye. She ran until she reached the church at the edge of town, the place where she had always found peace, where she had learned to quiet the noise of the world and listen for the voice of God. It was here, in this sacred space, that she had always sought refuge from the chaos of her life. Lena didn't care that the church was empty or that the night was cold. She entered, her breath coming in shallow gasps, and walked straight to the pew in the back. With trembling hands, she reached for the ring on her finger, the one that had been her mother's and had always carried so much meaning. The weight of it felt different now. The promise that had been tied to it seemed so distant, so lost. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, Lord, I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know why this ring exists. I don't know why I'm here, why you've brought me to this point. Her voice cracked as she continued. But if you gave me this ring for a reason, show me that reason. I don't want revenge. I don't want to destroy anyone. I just want to understand. Please, show me the way. Lena knelt in the pew, her face buried in her hands, her heart crying out in the silence of the church. She wasn't asking for answers about the past. She wasn't begging for justice in the way that she once thought she needed. She just wanted to know what God wanted her to do, what her next step should be. And as she sat there, alone with the echoes of her prayer, something shifted inside her. Outside, Damon stood in the shadows, watching the church from across the street. He had followed her, though he didn't know why. He had no real right to intrude into her space after everything that had happened, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed her, that he had broken something between them that might never be fixed. He had seen the pain in her eyes. He had seen the hurt he had caused, and it was a pain he had been complicit in. And for the first time in his life, Damon wasn't sure if he could make things right. But he didn't leave. He stayed there, hoping, praying that somehow he could find a way to make amends. He could find a way to help her understand the truth. Maybe he couldn't undo everything. Maybe he couldn't erase the damage his father had done. But perhaps, just he could help heal what had been broken. Lena didn't hear the footsteps approaching, didn't feel Damon's presence until he was standing at the entrance of the church. She turned, startled. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears, but there was something different in the way she looked at him now. He had followed her here, after everything. And despite the tension, despite the weight of the past, there was something in the air between them, a fragile understanding, a hope for something better. "I'm sorry," Damon whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Lena looked at him quietly, then spoke softly. "Sorry doesn't undo what's been done. Sorry doesn't change the truth." He nodded slowly. "I know, but maybe it's a start." For the first time, Lena didn't feel like running. She didn't feel like retreating from the world that had always hurt her. Instead, she felt something stir within her, a glimmer of faith, a tiny seed of hope. This was far from over. But as long as she had the ring, as long as she had God's guidance, she knew there was still a path ahead. A path toward healing, toward redemption. But first, Damon had to choose. He had to choose whether he would live in the lies of the past or embrace the truth that could set them all free. The storm that had raged inside Damon had reached its peak. He had walked away from his father's empire once, a long time ago, when the weight of his family's legacy had been too much to bear. But this time, the storm inside him wasn't just about his own pain. It was about Lena, the woman he had come to respect, admire, and love in ways he hadn't understood before. As he stood in front of the grand glass doors of Ellison Enterprises, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had chosen to stand with Lena, to stand for truth. And in that moment, he knew there would be no turning back. Inside, the boardroom was packed with the kind of people who could make or break fortunes. The kind of people who looked at the world as one big game to win. They all stood, sleek and polished, their suits and ties hiding the greed and power plays beneath. Damon walked in, his eyes fixed on one person, the man who had shaped his entire life, his father, Nathaniel Ellison. Nathaniel stood at the head of the table, his cold, calculating gaze taking in the room, sizing up everyone in it. But when he saw Damon step forward, a flash of unease flickered in his eyes. It was brief, but Damon noticed. He knew what it meant. His father was used to controlling everything, but for the first time, Damon was taking control of his own destiny. "Damon," Nathaniel's voice was smooth, like ice gliding over steel. "What is this about?" Damon's jaw clenched. He had spent too many years trying to bury this truth. Too many years pretending he didn't care, pretending the lies didn't hurt him. But it wasn't just about him anymore. He couldn't allow the Ellison name, the name that had become synonymous with manipulation and deceit, to go unchallenged. "I need you to tell them, Father." Damon's voice was steady, his eyes locked on Nathaniel. "Tell them everything. About the trust funds. About what you did to Lena's mother. About what you did to our family." The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. A few shuffled in their seats, murmuring, but Nathaniel's expression didn't change. He straightened, his hands gripping the back of his chair as if to steady himself. "You've gone too far this time, Damon." Nathaniel's voice dropped to a threatening whisper, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're talking about. You'll regret this." "I don't think I will," Damon replied, his voice gaining strength. "The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not. You can't hide behind your lies anymore." Nathaniel's lips tightened, but Damon didn't give him the chance to speak again. He turned to face the board, his voice booming as he addressed them all. The Ellisons illegally seized trust funds that were meant for Lena's mother. Trust funds that were meant to protect a family. But you stole them, didn't you, Father? You stole them to feed your greed. Gasps filled the room as the realization dawned on the members of the board. Damon could feel the eyes of the room shift between him and his father, and it was as if the walls themselves were pressing in on Nathaniel. His father, the man who had always held such power, was now standing in the spotlight of his son's accusation. Damon could hear his own heart pounding in his chest, but he wasn't backing down. "Not now." "You're lying," Nathaniel growled, his voice shaking with rage. "Your mother." "My mother tried to leave you," Damon interrupted, the words coming out sharper than he expected. "She tried to take Lena's mother away from you. But you couldn't let her go, could you? You couldn't let anyone find out what you had done. So you made her disappear. You let her die." A cold silence hung in the room. Damon's words had struck with the force of a hammer. His father, the man who had always been untouchable, was crumbling under the weight of his own guilt. Damon could see it in his eyes, the flicker of fear, the knowledge that the truth was finally out. Lena's name, the name he had spent so many years trying to erase, was now tied to this family's legacy. And in that moment, Damon realized that this was the moment of no return. Lena was not just the daughter of a woman who had been wronged. She was the rightful heir to everything the Ellisons had built, the empire that had been built on lies, on stolen futures, on blood money. The board members exchanged hurried whispers now. Some looked at their phones, trying to digest what Damon had just revealed, while others stared at the table, afraid to make eye contact. Damon's pulse raced as he saw the power dynamic shift right before his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt free from the chains of his father's world. Lena. The ring. The truth. Damon turned his gaze back to his father. Lena's mother was never a thief. She was never an outsider. She was family. And Lena deserves everything that was taken from her. There was a long pause. Nathaniel was silent, his face ashen, his hands trembling. Damon knew the fight had been lost. His father had no more lies to tell, no more manipulations to make. Lena was the heir. The truth had been laid bare. Meanwhile, in a small church at the edge of town, Lena sat alone, her hands gripping the ring once more. She had prayed for guidance, for clarity, and for a path forward. She didn't know what the outcome would be. She didn't know what Damon had done, what had been uncovered. But she knew one thing. No matter what the world had thrown at her, no matter how broken she felt, she had held on to her faith. She had trusted that God would show her the way, even when the darkness threatened to consume her. And now, as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, she felt something shift inside her. A sense of peace washed over her, a peace that came not from the wealth or the status that Damon had uncovered, but from the truth that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. This ring was not just a symbol of a broken past. It was a promise of a future that would be different. A future where justice could still be found. A future where her mother's legacy would finally be honored. Lena looked down at her hands, the weight of the ring now feeling like a mantle of responsibility. She wasn't just a victim of the past. She was a woman of purpose, a woman who would step into the life God had intended for her all along. And with Damon by her side, they would take back everything that was lost, not through revenge, but through redemption. The storm had passed. The truth had been revealed. And now, a new chapter was about to begin. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. The room was packed, its energy crackling with anticipation. The stakes couldn't have been higher. What had begun as a simple act of defiance against a family's empire had turned into a battle for the soul of an entire legacy. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the truth. It was about justice. And it was about peace. Mr. Ellison, still clinging to his position of power with a vice-like grip, stood at the front of the room, his face flushed with indignation. His eyes, however, betrayed him. There was something desperate behind his cold gaze, a vulnerability he was too proud to admit. He turned to face Lena, the young woman who had shattered the perfect facade of the Ellison family. In his hands, he held a stack of fabricated documents, papers he'd paid to have forged. They were evidence, or so he claimed, that Lena had no rightful claim to the Ellison fortune, that the truth about her mother's past was a lie. He tried to look calm, but his hands trembled slightly as he handed the documents to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Ellison's voice dripped with faint confidence. These documents prove that Lena Harper has no claim to my family's wealth. She is nothing more than a fraud, a thief, trying to steal what doesn't belong to her. The room buzzed with whispers. His words were sharp, and for a moment, it seemed as though his power was once again in the ascendancy. But the moment didn't last. Are you enjoying this story so far? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Damon stood up, a calm but resolute figure in the midst of the chaos. He had been silent for most of the proceedings, but now his voice cut through the noise. I object, Damon said firmly, stepping forward. His words were not just a legal argument. They were a declaration, a moment of truth. What my father is presenting is a fabrication, and I have the real will. From the corner of the room, Damon's cousin, Ethan, an attorney who had stayed in the background for years, quietly living his faith, stood up. He carried a large, weathered envelope with him, and there was a quiet assurance in his eyes as he made his way to the judge's desk. "Your Honor," Ethan began, his voice steady and unwavering, "I have here the original will, the document that proves Lena Harper's right to her mother's legacy. A will that my aunt, Damon's mother, left behind. A will that was hidden, erased from public records by the Ellisons to protect their fortune." He placed the will on the table in front of the judge. The room fell silent. The truth was now a tangible thing, resting in front of everyone, undeniable and unshakable. For a moment, Mr. Ellison's face contorted with rage. He tried to speak, to deny the will, but Damon spoke over him, his voice carrying the weight of his newfound conviction. "This is the truth. This is what my father has tried so hard to keep hidden. Lena's mother was never a thief. She was a woman of integrity, and so is Lena. I've spent my life trying to distance myself from this family's sins, but it's time to face the consequences." The judge, a man known for his impartiality, carefully examined the will. He turned it over in his hands, verifying the signatures, and then looked at Mr. Ellison, who was now pale with disbelief. "I believe we've heard enough," the judge finally said. His voice was steady, but the decision he was about to render would change everything. The courtroom remained still, the air heavy with anticipation as Lena took the stand. Her eyes, though quiet and unassuming, radiated strength. She wasn't here to fight for riches. She wasn't here to tear down an empire. She was here for peace. With every step she took toward the microphone, the room seemed to hold its breath. She was still holding the ring. It had become more than just a piece of jewelry. It had become a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had lost, and everything she was reclaiming. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but powerful. "I never wanted your money," Lena said, her words breaking through the tension like a soft, steady light. "I only wanted peace. I wanted peace for myself, for my mother, for the years we lost because of lies. And I wanted the truth to be known. That's all." Her words hung in the air like a prayer, and the room, so filled with anger and greed just moments before, seemed to soften. For a brief moment, the bitter edge of the Ellison legacy dissolved. In that moment, Lena was not just an heir. She was a woman of grace and strength, claiming her dignity without ever raising her voice in anger. The judge nodded, as if acknowledging the weight of her words. He turned to the board, who had been listening intently. It was clear that their minds were made up, the decision already in motion. And then the verdict came. "Lena Harper is awarded full rights to her mother's legacy," the judge declared, his voice resonating throughout the courtroom. "The documents presented by Mr. Ellison have been proven to be fraudulent. And as such, Lena Harper is the rightful heir." The room erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. For Damon, a deep sense of relief washed over him. The weight of the last few weeks had been heavy, but now, finally, there was clarity. But the judge wasn't done. He turned to Nathaniel Ellison, whose face had grown ashen. "Mr. Ellison," the judge continued, "you are hereby removed as CEO of Ellison Enterprises, effective immediately. The board will be convening shortly to appoint a new leader. Your actions have violated the trust of those you were sworn to serve." The impact of those words reverberated in Damon's chest. For all the power, all the control Nathaniel had once held, it was slipping away, crumbling like dust between his fingers. His empire was falling apart, and the truth had taken its place. And then, as the final blow, Damon turned to the board and made his own declaration. "I resign," he said, his voice resolute, calm. "I can no longer be a part of this. I can no longer stand by and watch corruption reign. This company needs a new direction, one of integrity, one of truth." Outside the courtroom, the weight of the battle lifted from Damon's shoulders. The truth had come to light. But for Lena, the battle was still not over. She walked out of the courtroom, her hand clutching the ring, her heart full of both sorrow and hope. She had always believed that the truth would set her free, and today it had. As she stepped into the sunlight, the weight of her mother's legacy was finally lifted, and in its place stood a woman who had reclaimed everything stolen from her, not just money or titles, but the peace she had longed for. The future was no longer a shadow of her past. It was hers to shape. Damon walked beside her, no longer just the heir to a broken legacy, but a man reborn in truth. He had chosen to stand by her, to fight for what was right. Together, they would move forward, united, not by the chains of the past, but by the strength of the truth they had fought to uncover. And as they walked away from the ruins of the Ellison Empire, both knew the future was bright, and it belonged to them. In the days following the courtroom showdown, the world had changed for Damon and Lena. It was as if the pieces of their lives, once scattered in disarray, were slowly coming together in a way they never could have predicted. There was no longer a battle to fight, no empire to tear down, no secrets to uncover. What remained was the quiet, steady work of rebuilding, of healing, and of building something that would last. Damon, despite all the wealth and power he had once known, had discovered that it wasn't titles or mansions that truly mattered. It was purpose. It was giving back. And so, with a profound sense of responsibility, he established a foundation under Lena's name. The Lena Harper Foundation. A name that would now stand for something far more significant than anything the Ellison legacy had ever represented. The foundation's mission was simple, but profound. It would support single mothers striving to provide for their families, offering financial assistance, mentorship, and a chance at a better life. But it didn't stop there. Lena had another vision, one that had been shaped by years spent working with her father's tools in the small, dusty garage she had inherited. It was here, in the hands of young people, that Lena saw the potential to change lives. The foundation would also offer scholarships and training for young mechanics, those who, like her father, would be able to turn wrenches and engines, but more importantly, would be given the skills to build their futures, to rise above the challenges they faced. It was a place where hands were not just taught how to work, but how to dream. And as Damon watched her bring this vision to life, he couldn't help but be in awe of the quiet strength Lena carried within her. She had never asked for recognition. She had never wanted to be in the spotlight. But now, she was changing the world, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Lena had returned to her father's old garage, a place she had always regarded with both love and sadness, and begun the painstaking process of restoring it. But this time, it wasn't just a place to fix cars. It was to be a sanctuary for the youth of Ashtonville, a place where they could come, learn, and grow. It would be a community center, full of life and possibilities. It was here, in this modest garage-turned-youth center, that Lena wore the ring for the first time publicly. Not as a symbol of wealth or power, but as a testimony. A testimony to the woman her mother had been. A testimony to the promise her mother had made and kept. And most of all, a testimony to the truth that had set her free. When Lena stood before the young people in the garage, her hands outstretched as they worked together on a car engine, she wore that ring with pride. It was a quiet, simple gesture, but it meant everything. The youth center became a sanctuary in its own right. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees of Ashtonville, young men and women came to the garage. They learned how to fix cars, how to fix their futures. They learned about hard work, perseverance, and faith. And in the quiet moments when Lena spoke, they listened. They heard the story of a woman who had been through loss and betrayal but had come out the other side stronger, who had come to understand that it wasn't the past that defined her, but the way she chose to live in the present. Damon spent countless hours by her side, quietly observing the impact she had on the community. His role in the foundation, though instrumental, was always behind the scenes. He wasn't trying to rewrite his story. He was simply there to help her write hers. Through it all, Damon and Lena found themselves growing closer. Their relationship wasn't built on the foundations of romance, but that was an undeniable undertone. No, their connection was built on mutual respect, admiration, and something deeper. There was an understanding between them, unspoken but present, that they were in this together, walking side by side. They had both fought their battles, both stood in the face of their fears, and now they were facing a new future, one filled with purpose and redemption. But they didn't rush it. They didn't rush anything. The days passed in quiet companionship, in shared moments of laughter and work. Lena continued to lead the youth center with unwavering faith, always showing up, always serving. Damon supported her in ways she never expected, using his influence to secure grants and help spread the word about the foundation. Yet, neither of them spoke of love. Not yet. They didn't need to. It was the small things that mattered. Damon bringing Lena her favorite coffee from the local diner after a long day. Lena offering Damon a wrench when his hands were full, never asking for anything in return. Together, They built something far greater than any empire could offer, a sense of community, of belonging, of hope. And through all of it, there was still the ring. Every night, as Lena sat quietly by her mother's grave, she would hold the ring in her hand. She would talk to God, as she had always done, and thank Him for the strength to move forward. She would pray for the young people at the youth center, for the families that were slowly rebuilding their lives, for Damon, who had become her closest friend, her ally, and, in time, something more. Lena had never wanted wealth or status. She had never desired the luxuries of a life she had never known. But she had always wanted peace, a peace that only came when she had given up the burden of anger and resentment. And now, peace was something she found in every moment. The laughter of children at the center, the quiet hum of an engine as it roared back to life, the warmth of Damon's presence beside her. In the weeks and months that followed, Lena became a pillar of her community, a woman whose strength was not just in her ability to survive, but in her ability to inspire others to live boldly, to rise above their circumstances, to reclaim their futures. And Damon, for all his wealth and titles, had learned a valuable lesson. The true measure of a man's success wasn't in his fortune, his title, or his reputation. It was in the lives he touched. The legacy he left behind wasn't one built on corporate deals or family dynasties. It was a legacy of integrity, of truth, and of a love that had been quietly nurtured, step by step. And so, as the years passed, their lives were no longer defined by the shadows of the past. They were defined by the work they did, the lives they touched, and the quiet moments of grace that defined their days. Together, they built a new kind of empire, one that would never fall. The rain had stopped, the clouds had cleared, and the sun was finally peeking through the trees, casting a golden light on the lives that had been changed. But there's one question that still lingers in the quiet of this story, the question that each of us must face in our own journey. Would you have helped him on that rainy road? Would you have stopped, knowing nothing about the man you were about to meet? Would you have extended your hand, even when the world told you it was a bad idea? Lena did. And in doing so, she not only changed a life, she uncovered a truth. And what about the ring? Was it just a family heirloom? A simple piece of jewelry? Or was it something more? Something greater? Was the ring a symbol of fate? Or was it a reminder of a deeper faith? A faith in God's plan, that even in the darkest moments, His hand was guiding the way. What do you believe? As you've watched this story unfold, perhaps you've seen parts of your own journey reflected in it. Perhaps there's been a moment in your life when you stood at the crossroads of faith and doubt, when the weight of the past threatened to pull you under, yet something deep inside kept you moving forward. You are not alone. We would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Was this a story of fate or of divine timing? Did the ring truly lead them home? Was it justice, or was it grace that redeemed them in the end? Let us know in the comments below. Share your own experiences with faith, timing, and the powerful force of redemption. And if this story resonated with you, if it spoke to the place in your heart that believes in second chances, in the goodness of people, and in the power of truth, then like this video. Subscribe for more stories of hope, love, and the unshakable faith that keeps us all moving forward, even when the road is uncertain. Because, just like Damon and Lena, each of us has a story to tell. A story that matters. A story that can inspire others to believe that no matter how dark the night, there's always a promise of a new dawn, of healing, of redemption, and of grace. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. And may your journey, like theirs, lead you home.